church family. It's Tuesday of Holy Week. Holy Week refers to the final week of Jesus' earthly life before his crucifixion and resurrection. In the four Gospels, there are at least 30 chapters dedicated to the events of Holy Week. That's about 35% of the content of the Gospels. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the countdown to Calvary began. In these Holy Week devotions, we're highlighting the key events that took place in the life of Jesus during this final week of his earthly life. And today we come to Holy Tuesday. The events of Holy Tuesday are recorded in all four Gospels. They're recorded in Matthew chapter 21, verses 23 through chapter 23, verse 39. In Mark chapter 11, verses 27 through chapter 13, verse 37. In Luke chapter 20, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 38, and John chapter 12, verses 20 through 36. When we put these gospel accounts together, we can see what transpired on that final Tuesday of Jesus' earthly life. On Monday, Jesus cleared the temple, and he cursed the fig tree before returning to Bethany to spend the night. And then on Tuesday morning, as Jesus and his disciples are returning to Jerusalem from Bethany, they pass by the withered fig tree that he had cursed the day before. And Jesus uses this opportunity to teach his disciples a lesson about faith, prayer, and forgiveness. Mark chapter 11, verses 20 through 26 records that Jesus said to his disciples, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses." After the lesson on the fig tree, Jesus and his disciples returned to Jerusalem, in which he went back into the temple and began to teach. And while Jesus is teaching in the temple, the Jewish leaders, the scribes, the Pharisees, the chief priests, the elders, they tried to trap Jesus with a series of questions. First, they questioned his authority. In Luke chapter 20, verses 1 through 8, we read that while Jesus is teaching in the temple and preaching the gospel, the religious leaders interrupted him and said, "Tell us, by what authority do you do these things? Who gave you this authority?" And so Jesus responded by telling them three parables. He told them a parable of two sons, the parable of tenant farmers, and a parable about a wedding feast, to show the religious leaders that they were rejecting the truth of the gospel because of their own hypocritical self-righteousness. These three parables are recorded in Matthew chapters 21 through 22. So after questioning Jesus about his authority, they then question him about his allegiance. According to Luke chapter 20, verses 19 through 26, when the Jewish religious leaders perceived that the parables were about them, they tried to entangle Jesus in his words. They questioned his allegiance by asking him if it was lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. And Jesus asked for a denarius. And he said, "Whose likeness and inscription does it have?" And they said, "Caesar's." And Jesus said, "Render therefore to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's." The religious leaders were amazed by his response, and they became silent. Next, they questioned him concerning the resurrection. According to Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 40, after he had silenced the Pharisees, the Sadducees questioned him about the resurrection. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. So they tried to trick Jesus by asking him a question about marriage in the resurrection, or will there be marriage in heaven? Jesus responded by telling them that they did not know the Scriptures or the power of God. And then he explained that those who will be in heaven will have new resurrected bodies. They will be like the angels. They will be children of God. And that there will not be marriage in heaven as we know it on earth. Jesus then reaffirmed the resurrection of the dead by sharing an example about Moses, when Moses called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Jesus said, "Now he is not God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him." And this silenced the scribes, and they no longer dared to ask him any more questions. Then the Pharisees questioned Jesus about the commandment. They found an expert in the law to question Jesus concerning what is the greatest commandment in the law. And Jesus responded by saying that the greatest commandment is that we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. And then we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. And on these two commandments depend all the law and prophets. That's Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. After silencing his critics, Jesus then pronounces 7 woes of coming judgment upon the scribes and the Pharisees. He called them hypocrites, blind leaders of the blind, and warned them about the coming judgment of God. And these 7 woes are recorded in Matthew chapter 23. This final Tuesday must have been an exhausting and tension-filled day for Jesus. So after he leaves the temple with his disciples, and they begin to head back toward Bethany, they stop to rest on the Mount of Olives. From the Mount of Olives, they must have had a beautiful view of Jerusalem and the temple with the sun setting behind them. As the disciples marveled about the temple and the buildings of the temple, Jesus taught what we have come to know as the Olivet Discourse, recorded in Matthew chapter 24, Matthew chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21. Jesus tells them that God's judgment will fall on the city and that the city and the temple will be destroyed. He tells his disciples that the city of Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies, and there will be a time of great tribulation unlike anything the world has ever known that will precede this coming day of judgment. He gives them these series of signs so that they will know exactly when God's judgment will fall. He tells his disciples that this coming judgment of God, in which the city and the temple will be destroyed, will take place in their generation. This prophecy was fulfilled in AD 70 when the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem, destroyed the city and the temple. But in describing the destruction of Jerusalem in their generation, Jesus seems to be foreshadowing a future time of tribulation and judgment that will be experienced by a future generation who is alive when Jesus returns. On this Tuesday before his crucifixion, Jesus promised his disciples and us that he is coming back again, and we're to be watchful and ready. Jesus then returned to Bethany with his disciples as the sun set on this final Tuesday. Tuesday is now over, but Friday is coming.